Welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us for another one of Wellspring's Be Well Talks. So, this is week 4 of taking back control of your life, adapt through grief. So, thank you so much if you have been following along the rest of the series. If this is your first time, the recordings for weeks 1 to 3 are available on our website as well. So, you're always welcome to catch up and take a look at the material that was covered. So I'm glad to introduce our speaker again, Joelle McKiernan. So Joelle is a registered social worker in British Columbia with a master's degree in social work. She is a certified counselor with the Canadian Counseling and Psychotherapist Association, and she has also worked as an adjunct professor at the University of Northern British Columbia and Coast Mountain College. She is also a program leader with Wellspring and also brings a personal lens to this webinar series as she was diagnosed with breast cancer in October of 2020. So Joelle, I will hand it over to you and thank you so much again for being here today.
So yes, welcome everyone back or newbies or whatever. I'm glad that you were able to come. I just want to say again, I acknowledge that I live on Tsimshian unceded territory of the Tsimshian Nation. I live in Northwest BC in a place called Terrace. That's the city name. And this is the final talk in the 4-part series. So yeah, a lot, and I went over it myself, and there's a lot of information, and I want to thank you for hanging in there and attending or watching the entire series if you're able to. And I recognize that there's been a lot of material in a short period of time. So, I really encourage you if it was too quick or some of the material that you can go back over it again and watch them on Wellspring's Be Well Talks, the self-leading section, and then you can take it in or write things down or whatever is helpful, because I know there was a lot of information. So today what we're going to talk about is figuring out for yourself. So thinking about your own personal exploration and what is happening in your own grieving process. Where are the blocks that you find, and what may be causing some undue stress or things that are causing you um, a lot of pain and suffering and other symptoms that may come along with that. We're going to talk about, I know someone had a question about sleep. We're going to talk about that at the very end. So don't let me forget. But I do want to say just out front that, grieving is not an illness, right? Um, it's not a sickness. It's not something that needs to be fixed per se, that there's something wrong with you. It is, as we said in the first session, it is a universal process we go through as human beings, because we're attached to life. Just like breathing, you can't live without breathing, and you can't live without attaching to life, right? We were able to form into human beings because we were attached to our mom's womb, right? So attachment is a universal and needed process. And so when we talk about that attachment, when we lose attachments, then you're going to experience grief. So you're here to experience life, and grief is one of those experiences. May be unfortunate, but I think it's something to learn from. But it's not easy, and it can be quite painful. So today we're going to continue on with the ADAPT acronym. We're going to look at personal responsibility. So this is, again, understanding our own personal um, blocks or things like that. As I said in the last session, I believe that when I talk about responsibility, I'm not talking about, that that kind of word responsibility. You need to take responsibility. What I'm saying is if we break that word into two, to me, it asks the question, do I have the ability to respond to my current circumstances? And if I don't, then that's where skills need to be developed, or we need to look at your beliefs, or your around emotions and sharing them and feeling all those kinds of things. So do I have the ability to respond? Do I have what I need to move through this and adapt? So, and then the last one, but it's not the least, I actually wish the T could be first because it's so, so vital and important. And that is treating yourself with patience, kindness, and compassion. We don't heal really in harshness. So let's keep that in mind, and we'll talk about that again as we come up. So the personal response ability, so the ability to respond, right? So gaining skills to help the ability to respond to our circumstances, to what we're adapting to, our new environment, right? So first of all, what we want to do is the tools and skill development that we need throughout the journey into renewal, or into this healing journey that we're on. So tools and skill develop. We're going to go into each one of these in more depth, but that's what we're going to talk about: how to assess what kind of skills or tools that you need. The second one is adjusting to the new world and life without that which we lost. What does that look like? What do we need for that? What kind of questions do we need to ask ourselves around that? Where are we stuck? Are we stuck? Or those kinds of questions. And then talking about taking back control through choices and exploration. And we're going to talk about what that looks like. What really do we have control over, and what don't we? And then the last thing we're going to talk about in this area is dealing with unfinished business and what that means. So, tool and skill development depends on, of course, this is what it depends on, and each person's answers to these questions or understandings are going to be different. And so, I could say, well, here's a list of tools, but they could not fit your circumstances, or that they may not work for you, or whatever, right? So these are how you kind of figure out, okay, where do I need to work on? What is it that is how I view this grieving process, and what tools do I and skills do I need to develop? So it matters about the type of the loss. So is it a sudden, is it unexpected? Were you anticipating the loss? Is it a compound loss, which means that one on top of the other? So, maybe you had a death and then you were diagnosed, or, that those kinds of things. That can you know, dep depending on how you react to that, or the perception of that, of course, those are the skills that you need to develop, right? Is to recognize that this was sudden, unexpected, that, even if you had time with it, it's still something that's changing your world. Um, and your environment, and the way that you look at the world, that it's compound. When it's compound, that makes it more challenging, because we don't kind of know what we're grieving about. It's just kind of it's a big mess when we have compound loss, one on top of the other. And sometimes there's that anticipation of the loss, right? So when we anticipate a loss, we start the grieving earlier. It's called anticipatory grief. And so if we're caring for someone or trying to help someone, we can start that grieving process of the loss of what that means, way before anything that they pass away or anything critical happens in that way. So that's called anticipatory grief. So that's all possible. The nature of the loss, right? That talks about what's the attachment. How close am I to the loss, right? Is it a part of my daily life? Um, or is it something that just is, not a part of my daily life? Like if it's an uncle that, you don't see very often, yes, you can still have the sadness and everything, but it won't, the intensity usually of the loss and what you're feeling about that loss really depends on how attached you were to it, how much of that attachment is broken. Okay. Personality. Yeah, this means, um, again, the meaning that you assign to changes in your life, how you adapt, how you feel. Do you feel in control? How do you handle the unknown, certainty and uncertainty? How do you handle those issues in your day-to-day life, never mind the grieving? Because all of those kinds of things will come up, right? Those patterns and those adaptations that you had around how to deal with when you feel out of control, when you are unsure and unknown about what's happening, right? For instance, so some examples of personality kind of patterns is, do I need to do everything perfectly? That's that perfectionist. Um, another one is, I'm not comfortable unless everyone likes me. And so if that's happening, then it's hard for you to set maybe some boundaries and things like that. I want to please everybody, right? So focusing on other people as a way to stay safe and everything okay. Well, when you're grieving, when you're dealing with this, that has to adapt and change to to what's more manageable for you. Do I use blame and criticism to control myself? Do I beat myself up when I'm upset or when something's gone wrong? All of those kinds of things will uh will tell you kind of what tools you need to develop to deal with those kinds of things. I override my thought. I'm oh, sorry, over identify with my thoughts. So are you a ruminator? Do you think a lot? Are you, in your head a lot? And with that kind of thing, you know that you want more of a balance, right? Because the feelings, remember we talked about this, are felt in the body, right? So we want to connect with that body and those feelings. And so if you're a head person, then your role or some of the skills you'll need to develop has to do with going to your body and allowing for expression as opposed to just trying to fix it by thinking or think your feelings away. That doesn't work. Uh, um, Another possibility for personality is I need to protect myself from others and a changing world, right? Well, how does that take on? What kind of uh, uh, ways do you do that? What kind of protective defenses and mechanisms do you have for that? And then socialization, we kind of talked about this in the first session as well. How did your family teach you about loss and emotional expression, right? I know that you're grown-ups now, but often we do kind of revert back when we're feeling stressed and overwhelmed to those childhood patterns of what's okay and what's not okay. They're automatic. It doesn't mean that you're a child. It just means that they become automatic, and we don't realize that we're doing them until we really explore and kind of take time to say, okay, yeah, when this happens, I shut down. I wonder why, and exploring that through journaling or whatever ways that you need in order to understand. Because one of the things I've said throughout this whole thing is awareness is the key, right? As soon as you become aware of the issue, then you can seek to change it or to develop tools for it, or then you're on the road to the healing from that. Um, what were your family rules and expectations of people who were grieving, who were sick, who were, in your situation as a caregiver, or who are struggling with the death of someone? What do you think that society allows you to do? What are those kinds of things? So socialization can be helpful in terms of rituals and things like that, but they can also be problematic if they're stopping you from that. That's called kind of the cultural. We'll go on to that. So coping ability. What do you do when you are stressed? Well, how do you cope with that? What is helpful or what is distracting you from your feelings? Right? So if you're busy, 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 because you don't want to feel something, then you're coping, but that feeling doesn't go away. That's one of the issues with feelings is that they don't just disappear. You can bury them, you can suppress them, but they're still in your body, right? And so am I coping to distract in a negative way that's not helpful, that is suppressing my feelings? And how can I allow some of those feelings maybe to come up? Doesn't mean you have to completely give away the distraction. Maybe that's what you need sometimes, but recognizing, you know what, I'm avoiding something too. And what is it that I'm avoiding? Right? And looking at that. History of loss with cancer. What have you witnessed when someone's been diagnosed with cancer? Have you watched others go through a process with this disease? Have you watched others be caregivers? What's your history with loss of the of to deal with cancer? Through through friends or even closer to home, right? Have you lost someone to this disease? And if so, how does that impact maybe your own dealing with the disease? It has a big impact, right? So, sorry, there you go. So, yeah, so that can be really important. The cultural context. How does your value and belief system support the process of the adaptation? right? Is it in conflict with you moving forward? What kind of rights and rituals do you have in your community? Do you have a community of support around your culture? And if not, then there are support groups through Wellsprings that with people who are struggling with the same things that you are, you know, and hopefully you can find and build that support network that would be helpful for you, right? Moving on to support group, but culture is really important. What's your value and belief systems? Is it that, when you get cancer that you've done something wrong, or which is, you need to challenge that, right? And in supporting that, the grieving process, which is the adaptation we're looking to move through, to create a new way of looking at the world in the circumstances that you find yourself in. A support network. So who do you trust and who do you want to limit your time with? This is going to maybe take a big change now that you're involved in dealing with cancer. How do you create a support system that allows you to honor your process of adapting? Right? Some people maybe in your support network are, challenging the way that you're doing things, or they, when they express, their concerns or whatever, it's not helpful to you. It shuts you down or whatever. So you have to really decide who you're going to share things with, right? Do you have, you know, yeah, who you can share what with, right? And you may be more private with some things, or develop tools to be able to say no to people, right? That's a real struggle for some, is how do I say no? Healing journey helps with that, those kinds of skills, those kinds of ways of, really figuring out what you need and what you want, that authenticity. So healing journey is a really good program to go through to figure those kinds of things out. And then of course, our current stresses, obviously medical treatment, side effects, maybe post surgery, dealing with body issues, work, finances, your family or friends' adjustment to the cancer diagnosis. Because remember, all people are grieving in their own way, right? So, yeah, so it can be challenging to be with loved ones when they're grieving differently than you are. Maybe one, is more teary and can't kind of, talk to you seriously about something, whereas the other maybe, others may be really angry or whatever, and then you're dealing with your own grieving process as well. So exploration of a new set of circumstances. So this is the next thing we're looking at. So is how do we adapt, right? What or how are we adapting actually? How are we doing? Right? So um asking yourself these questions. What is the most stressful part of this loss? And just writing up a list if you can. What is the most stressful part of this loss? Okay? And and what is challenging me right now that wasn't before I got diagnosed, before I became a caregiver? What is the most challenging things? Those two things will give you real insight into where maybe tool development needs to happen, right? What's going on in terms of the tools that you need or things like that. Those will give you some real key points on that's happening. And then the really important one is, and it's a challenging one, is what am I willing to change to help myself adapt to this new environment I find myself in? And willingness, that's a big one, right? This is all part of choices, like taking choice, like having choices in your life, right? Recognizing I have choices. You have to open up to other possibilities, though, in order to have those choices. And this is part of regaining control, right? This is where taking control comes back into play. Is that I'm not going to do the same. I think it was Albert Einstein that says insanity is doing the same thing over and over again and expecting different results, right? The same things that we used to use before, our ways of coping, our ways of dealing with life, and can take a real change when we have a significant loss, whether that's a diagnosis or take on the role of caregiver, or if we're have lost someone. So So are we willing, and are we willing to take the steps necessary in order to adapt to the new environment? And yes, sometimes we have to do it kicking and screaming. We don't have to like it. But to move forward, we need to look at that and see what we're willing to. Grief, to me, grief is a time where you can reevaluate what no longer works for us and what to do to keep to the, sorry, and what do you want to keep, right? So what doesn't work and what does work, and moving forward, right? So there's a poem, and I'm gonna put this on the community board or community forum for you, and it's called "An Autobiography in 5 Chapters." And it's a poem by Portia Nelson, and it reflects on personal growth and self-awareness through a series of experiences. So this one, we're talking about, the experience of cancer and the grief. The poem is structured in 5 chapters, each illustrating a different stage of recognition and overcoming obstacles in life. So here's the poem. I walk down the street. This is chapter 1, I should say. I walk down the street. There is a deep hole in the sidewalk. I fall in. I am lost. I feel helpless. It isn't my fault. It takes forever to find a way out. Chapter 2. I walk down the same street. There is a deep hole in the sidewalk. I pretend I don't see it. I fall in again. I can't believe I'm in the same place, but it isn't my fault. It still takes a long time to get out. I walk down the chapter 3, sorry. I walk down the same street. There is a deep hole in the sidewalk. I see it is there. I still fall in. It's a habit, but my eyes are open. I know where I am. It is my fault. I get out immediately. I walk down the same street. There is a deep hole in the sidewalk. I walk around it. Chapter 5, I walk down a different street. So I want to go back to where it says it's my fault. Now, this isn't a fault of blaming. This is a fault of choice, right? It's not that, oh God, I'm a bad person and I did it again. It's like, oh, wait a minute. I have a different choice. And as soon as you acknowledge that and take that on, then you can make the different choice. Right? It's those patterns that we repeat and repeat. And once we recognize and say, oh, I can make a change here, I can do something different. That's the power. That's taking back your power and taking back control. So then let's move on and say, of the things, people, situations that are stressful in your life, those lists that you make up when you answer number 1 and 2, what do I have control over and what don't I have control over? So I found this really pretty picture on Pinterest, of course, and these are things I can control and can't control. So things that I can't control, what happens around me. I can control how I perceive it and react to it, but I can't control what happens around me. I can't control other people's motives, other people's happiness. I can't control the past, if people like me or not, how others respond and react. I can't control the weather, the future, other people's opinions, what people think I should or shouldn't do, other people's mistakes. I can't control any of those. But what I can focus on, and this is what we really want to focus on, are things that you can control. It's exhausting if you're worrying about things that you can't control. It's exhausting. So, things I can control, my own attitude, how I express myself, how to set my boundaries, my thoughts, my actions, the choices I make, being able to adapt to situations and changes, where I put my time and energy, the way I act, my words, asking for help, how I respond, my beliefs and values, and the way I treat others. Those are things you can control. Now, some of them you may need to learn skills around how to do that, but you do have control over those, whereas the others you don't. So that's how we talk about taking back control, is recognizing, wait a minute, is this something I have control over or not? that I'm worrying about? And if not, okay, how do I deal with that reaction that I need to take back control, or I need to do something about it when I actually can't. And then the other option is, okay, I can take control of this, and this is how I'm going to do it. So we also talked about unfinished business in that slide about how to take back the ability to respond. And unfinished business is something that a person needs to deal with or work on that's left unsaid. What it does is it complicates our grief because there's things left unsaid and undone, such as a matter that hasn't been dealt with or completed. It can really complicate that grieving process, as there may not be kind of a resolution or a closure to move forward in the grieving process, right? And it can have a really significant impact on our well-being. It could increase our stress and our anxiety, and can affect our mental and emotional health quite significantly. So, yeah, so this is what I'm talking about in terms of recognizing in your own grieving process if there's unfinished business. Because it can lead to a sense of unease and hinder that adaptation, and can actually reduce the quality of your life. So let's look at steps to manage it. So acknowledging to yourself verbally or in a journal or to a trusted friend that you have unfinished business. So what can that look like? That can look like, I haven't said what I needed to say to the person. I uh there's things left unresolved. Perhaps the relationship had some trauma in it. There's trauma that needs to be dealt with. You could go to a therapist for that, perhaps could be helpful to it. If you lost a person in your life that you had a traumatic bond to, or there was abuse in the situation, or there was alcoholism or addiction or something like that. Those can all be parts of that unfinished business, that there's things left unresolved within that relationship. Perhaps a relationship with yourself is too, that there's a lot of blaming because of some of your past behavior, drinking or smoking or whatever, that you are really, feeling to blame for the illness and all of those kinds of things. All of those things can be managed, can be dealt with, right? And um, so through therapy, through talking, through finding out with yourself, what is my unfinished business? What do I have that's left unresolved within this loss, right? Um, so developing the best strategy for yourself. Again, I wish I could say this is what you do to deal with it, but it really depends on the complication and how that fits into your life and how you deal with it. So here's some examples. So you can do a list of what the things are that you left unsaid or undone. You can break it into small steps. I need to do this, I need to do that. Maybe I need to phone and see if I can get a counselor. Maybe you can do some journal entries around it, expressions of, why do I beat myself up? And then answer that and say, is that fair? All of those kinds of things, kind of expressing your feelings and allowing yourself to express those feelings. That if you're not, find out why. Why can't I express my feelings? There's no one around. I'm an adult now. I'm not going to get in trouble from anybody. I can write it in that book and rip it up. I don't have to where's this shame or this guilt or this repression or suppression of feelings coming from? Write yourself a letter, or write letters to others. That you when there's things left unsaid or unexpressed. These are not letters that we're necessarily going to send, and in fact, I would suggest that you don't send it, because really the healing is yours. If you send a letter expecting someone to apologize for something they've done or whatever, then that puts your healing in their hands, and you don't want to do that. It's not helpful. You want to heal because you want to express that this was my life. This was my experience. This is what I felt to be true in our relationship or what happened, right? And so writing it down, and then grieving it, like crying, angry. And if you allow yourself to really write about it, it'll shift. So if you're really angry about it, you might shift into tears, and that's perfect. We want to move that energy, move that emotion, let it be in motion and let it change, you know. Yeah, so those kinds of things. And so you can write letters to people that you're mad at. Maybe you're mad at cancer. No, God, no, absolutely. You have a right to be. So write a letter to cancer and how it's wrecked your, whatever, and just let it out, and then let it go. Rip it up. Um, speak truth to yourself in the journal. Right. Try not to just sugarcoat it. Try and really let yourself express. No one needs to see it. If you're worried that someone's going to read it and you've had that experience, then rip it up, burn it, shred it, put a password if you're doing it on your phone, so no one else can see it, right? And you're understanding that your actions in the past, you're looking at them with that self-compassion, that when you were back then, you only knew what you knew then. That's really important. We tend to sit here now and judge ourselves back then and say, "Oh, we should have known. That's not right. We should have done that. We didn't know then what the outcome was going to be." I call that Monday morning quarterbacking. When you look at the tapes of the football game, and all of a sudden, you see, "Oh, I should have done that." Well, yes, of course, because now you know, right? And so we want to reflect and learn from the process, not beat ourselves up. Really important, not beat ourselves up. So, treating ourselves with kindness, compassion, really, really important. We have to really manage our own timeline for healing. Don't let anyone else tell you what your timeline for healing is, that you should be over it, or you should be this, or you should be that. Really listen to your intuition and understand you have your own timeline for healing. Increase the awareness of yourself in healing. So there was a guy by the name of Matthew Husey, that talked about taking care of your human. And what he says, and I find it really, really helpful, is he says, "So what if before you were born, the universe or God or whatever you believe to do said to you, 'I'm going to give you one job, and that job is to take care of one human, and that human being is you.'" Right? Are you doing your one job in this lifetime? Are you taking care of your human, which is you? Right? And so I often find that really helpful is when I'm stressed or something, I'll say, "Okay, what do I need to do for my human right now? What do I do?" Right? Because that helps me move past the whole judgment of, self-care is selfish and all those kinds of things, which is not true at all. And so am I taking care of my human? The other thing that I had to learn, and it was really hard to learn this, is I had to model what I wanted to see, and I had to teach people how to support me. Right? I can't assume that people understand what I need in order for the healing or whatever I need. I made real assumptions. Well, why don't you know how I'm feeling? Why don't you know that I need that? Even if I've told you over and over, why aren't you doing that? You have to be your own advocate, right? Model what you want to see in others. So if I want people to be compassionate, then I need to model that. If I'm going to be angry and angry and angry with people, then that's what I might get back, right? And so it's not bad that you're angry. You need to put it somewhere, right? So that might be in the journal, right? Or somewhere else. So model what you want to see in others, and then teach others how to support you. This is so challenging because, again, we have that automatic thinking that says, "Hey, they should know they've known me for this long and they should know what I need." Your life is changing. Your circumstances have changed, and so have theirs if they're a loved one or someone that you care about deeply. And so we need to get them on the same page. So we need to teach them how to take care of us or how to support us. So we had a question in the I'm sorry, I know I'm running a bit late. So we had a question in the forum about sleep, and sleep is such a challenge for me. I had a challenge last night sleeping again. And there are some tips that I can give you around sleep. It's called sleep hygiene, and they talk about it in the healing journey as well. And so things like go to bed at the same time if you can, like have a regular routine, which includes a regular bedtime. And the routine is, really important. Like, do I wash my face? Do I brush my teeth? Do I go into my pajamas? What is your routine? And make sure your routine is winding down. So we're not going to watch TV the last hour before we go to bed or be on any kind of screens, because that tends to be the light behind that tends to activate, and we want to deactivate. We want to kind of, slow down our mind and our body and tell our body, okay, it's time to go to bed. We're ready for sleep now. So we need to reduce those exposures to computers and things like that earlier. We want to provide an environment that feels safe, dark, comfortable, maybe warm or cold, which it depends on what you need. We want to be able to sleep in something that is light, perhaps. Especially if you have side effects around night sweats and hot flashes and things like that. We want to have clothing that matches that. And we also want to have clothing beside us that we can then change into if we have one of those and we need to. Right? We want to use things that'll calm us and self-soothing. So sometimes that's an aroma for people. Lavender is a good one. Sometimes that's nature sounds or soft music, any of those kinds of things. An eye mask might help with the darkness around this time, because I right here we don't get dark until like, I don't know, 10:30, 11. So um yeah, anything to what we're trying to do is induce that relaxation response. The other thing, the two things that I use are what's called what I call resetting the pattern. So for instance, if I wake up and I can't get back to sleep, then I go through my ritual of going to bed again. I know it sounds crazy, but this is what I do, and it helps sometimes, is that I will get up and I will start my bedtime routine again. So I will wash my face, I will brush my teeth, I will change my pajamas. I might read my inspirational this is my bedtime routine. I might, whatever you do before you go to bed. So what you're trying to do is tell your body, okay, it's time to go back to bed. Right. And you want that, because what happens is there's chemicals that are released in the body when we start that dewinding or that, going to bed. And those are, melatonin and those kinds of things, those internal um, chemicals that we need to in order to go to sleep. So that's what I do. I reset that pattern. And then the other thing that I do is called the dumping. So what if there's lots going on in my mind and I can't seem to rest my mind, then I dump. And what dumping is I just take whatever's going on in here and I put it on paper. So really quickly, just jotting it down. It doesn't need to be any kind of, paragraphs or anything like that. We don't want all the lights on either. We're just doing it in a small book, and we put that book by the side of the bed. If there's something in there you don't want people to read, then you rip it up. But you just kind of put everything in the book, and it's there. You know what it did. You let it go, or you put it on the paper, and then you can rest your mind and go back to sleep. With listening to a guided imagery is another one that would be really helpful. There's hundreds of them on YouTube, right? That'll take you into sleep, that'll give you that sleep um, music or whatever that would be helpful. Anything to induce that relaxation response. Yeah, so I wish you all well in your healing
Mhm.
journey and your adaptation by grieving. I wish you all well. And yeah, I may see you throughout the Wellspring other
Mhm.
programs and things like that. So just let me know that you saw the adaptation to grief so I know kind of what you know. That would be really great. I'd love it.